our panelists today and for their teammates in their various departments. And we just want to acknowledge them for their openness to new ways of seeing their scope and obligations and to do more than give lip service, if you will, to the idea of being joined at the hip. We've been saying that, but I have been privy to witnessing the manifestation of efforts, and it's not easily done. Huge bureaucracies, incredibly broad set of stakeholders that pull on management and executive level folks in Sacramento 20 hours out of the day. I kid you not. And so it's a very difficult task then to get outside of that and think about, well, how do we transform? And how do we build partnerships that are not intuitive often in our history? So just thrilled to introduce some folks who are going to talk to us about an exciting movement in that regard. Within the Assembly Bill 2083 work, which we've heard talked about once or twice in the last few days, as a unique opportunity in architecture to build interagency partnership, one of the obligations was to conduct some additional analysis about what the needs are and what the landscape looks like, specific in particular to foster youth and those with more complex or system-wide needs, if you will. And so our panelists today are going to share one really exciting element of that and orient us to how this tool might be potentially used going forward. So without further ado, let me share. Sara Rogers is the System of Care Branch Chief at the Children and Family Services Division at the California Department of Social Services. And a special pause here to acknowledge the title now is System of Care Branch Chief at CDSS. So here's the department understanding that just renaming itself might lead to some cultural modification right within our own practice. So kudos to CDSS a few years ago for that. Dina Kokkos-Gonzales is a behavioral health specialist. And Dina, I don't have an exact title for you. I know you're a dynamic person that goes everywhere in the department. Senior advisor, thanks Dina, at the California Department of Healthcare Services. Diana Casanova is a foster youth data liaison, consulting to the Education Research and Evaluation branch at the Data Access and Strategy Office at CDE. And Christine Bagley is now the Southern Region Manager in the Office of Community Operations at the California Department of Developmental Services. Really happy to have you and welcome. And you did your name tags. Fantastic. See? Partnership, teamwork. Thanks so much.
Good morning. Happy to see all of you. I just want to start by recognizing like how powerful this room is. It's pretty amazing to sit in a room filled with people that are about innovating, changing, breaking systems. I love it. Super excited to be here. As Richard mentioned, my name is Christine Bagley. I'm from the Department of Developmental Services. And I've had the privilege of working with my colleagues here in implementing and standing up the children and youth system of care here in California alongside all of our local system partners. And it has been pretty incredible. So I'm going to start today, and let me see where we're at. Oh, okay, let's see here. Maybe not. Maybe. Oh, maybe I'm not too tracking here. Oh, nope. Little entertainment. We're just mixing it up for you guys. Maybe not. Okay, we're gonna. Yeah.
Does it work if I'm?
Oh, okay. I like Sara better. So today we're going to share with you a little bit about a project that we undertook that we were mandated to do. Thank you. Of course, and about the framework, the governance structure, and the outcomes, and the landscape analysis, basically, of our youth and foster care. So we had the opportunity to work really closely with some partners who are not here today, unfortunately, and that's the Children's Data Network. So that's Emily Putnam-Hornstein, Reagan Faust, and they came alongside us and supported us on this project. And so we're going to take you through our methodologies and approaches to this report and some of the outcomes as a result of it. So we're really excited to share that with you today. So with that, I'll pass it to Sara.
Okay. Oh. On. So we are here. This is our overall agenda for our project. We are a team that is kind of a state level system of care team. So we are greater than the sum of the parts as a whole. And one of our projects is this data analysis. It was told to us this was impossible to do, to match the data across all of our departments. And I am going to credit Christine as our magician in making this happen. We have for many years been told that this was not possible. It was very, very difficult. And so we're going to be overviewing exactly those steps and what this report that is currently under stakeholder review entailed and some of the conclusions that we have found. So our agenda is to kind of describe the purpose of the report, the project summary, the analytical strategy, the governance of how we matched all of this data and produced the analytical framework. And then the report layout, overview the report layout, and making some high-level connections and findings that tracks back to a prior report that we also have published. What we're not trying to do today in this report is kind of give you the summary of all of the findings. So this is setting the stage for how we did the work and an overview of the report. This report will be published very soon after the stakeholder engagement process. And then at that point, it's our hope that those in the room and your colleagues are reading the report and coming to your own conclusions, but more importantly, the work is ongoing in terms of continuing to match the data. And so the relevance of the data, we want you to help inform, like, what are the next questions? What are the next analytical opportunities that you're seeing? Because this is really just matching a huge amount of data, and now there's a lot of further work to do. So the purpose of this project is in response to a legislative mandate. The legislature created the Children and Youth System of Care team made up of these departments, also creates the structure for the local level interagency leadership team. But there are some very focused mandates that we were required to accomplish. And one of them is to produce this report. The language is here. And it's to provide recommendations accounting for the specific needs and characteristics of youth, specifically around complex needs, so unplanned discharges, those youth that counties have been unable to serve. It's very foster youth focused. However, as a team, we have really moved the work beyond just looking at foster youth and see that in our future, are trying to build tools and resources that have the applicability beyond just looking at foster youth, but that is the foundational purpose. And the goal is to look at our data and understand what's missing in our continuum, what are the opportunities to improve our care. And we realize, well, we can't really do this if we don't have matched data across all of our systems. And so we started working on the project in order to accomplish it. So, you'll see there's a specific mandate to use this data to plan for the continuum of services in a data-informed way. Did it go?
All right. So, as Sara mentioned, of course, with any project, there's opportunities and there's limitations. So just wanted to kind of lift up, this is the first ever, as Sara mentioned, landscape analysis where we were able to achieve looking at basically records by youth across multiple systems. So pretty powerful. This again creates the framework that we're able to leverage in the future to do deeper drill downs and better research questions, deeper research questions. So the limitations, of course, is this is not going to answer all the questions that we have today, right? And it really leaves us with more questions than it does even answers. So we just wanted to call out some of the opportunities and limitations of the report. Okay. So when we came together with, I'm going to say CDN, so it's Children's Data Network, but we love alphabet soup in our systems, right? So when we worked with CDN, they really helped us kind of frame out, right, our project summary. So we started there, right? Like what's our overall like goals and intention. So we pulled together our project partners. As I mentioned, that was Children's Data Network. It was our Children and Youth System of Care state team. So those are people at the state department level who are assigned and tasked to do this system of care work. And then we also pulled in CDE, so California Department of Education, California Department of Social Services, Department of Healthcare Services, and the Department of Social Services. We had to pull in our legal experts as well as our data experts, right? Because you're sharing personal information. So the intention of our project was to generate baseline data about the children and youth that we are serving in care that have experienced severe trauma. The goal of us was to kind of be able to gather, look at sociodemographic characteristics, cross-program service interactions, and look at the distribution of those youth across California. And so that's kind of our high-level project summary. Next slide. So then we had to develop an analytical strategy, kind of what was going to be the more kind of analytical lenses that we were going to look through. So our target population, we defined our target population, of course, as previously mentioned, children, youth, and foster care who've experienced trauma. And how we're defining that is we took children and youth ages 0 through their 21st birthday who had an open foster care episode during our observation window, which was 2021, as documented in social services data. And I think it's important to kind of note when we say 0 through the 21st birthday, right, it gets kind of technical. So that could be inclusive of any child born within that year or who turned 22 within that year. So that's the window we looked at. And then the goals, of course, developed descriptive statistics for the population, and then characterize how they're intersecting with our systems, and then document the distribution. So really at a high level, we wanted to see who those youth were using social services data, their system, what their experiences were in navigating, and their experiences related to the multi-program or system involvement. So I'm going to use a word, and I learned this from CDN, and again, wish they were here. So social services was the spine for our data. So we took, as you'll see, DDS data, developmental services data, and we linked it to social services. We took healthcare services data, linked it, and CDE's data and linked it. In the final report, you'll see social services as kind of this, what they call this analytical spine. And then there's like individual columns that pull out the each of our additional programs data. So that's kind of the overall framework of our kind of analytical strategy and how we defined our project. So, right, big question in the room, like, how do you legally do this, right? Which is where people go, like, you can't do that. Well, we really were fortunate in that agency has been the California Health and Human Services Agency, right, who's over all the departments except for CDE, which we'll get into a little bit, has created this umbrella that allows us to, the departments to sign on that has some broad agreements for sharing data. And then underneath that umbrella, it creates this kind of relationship or governance structure that allows us to have these micro agreements to exchange data. So we had this kind of intact data sharing umbrella. And when agency took that on, they also entered into a contractual relationship with CDN, and they developed something called the Record Reconciliation Project Agreement. And if you have ever heard Emily Putnam-Hornstein talk, she worked with agency to create linkage keys to connect individual cases across multiple programs. So what we did is we first stopped and we said, what tools do we have in our toolbox? Well, we have this umbrella data sharing agreement for Health and Human Services departments. Okay, we have the record reconciliation agreement that allows CDN to link our data and, on some level, manipulate it, analyze it. But there was some limitations. So as you'll see, we had to do an amendment to that record reconciliation agreement that allowed CDN to work with our data in different ways. But then we had CDE, which is not underneath that governance structure. So we had to work all this out, right? Sorry, and I'm skipping ahead here. So then the second bullet, there was an existing relationship between social services and CDN with the Berkeley project that you guys do for all the child welfare indicators. So through that contractual agreement, we leveraged that in that we were able to have all of their spine data that was already organized. So we leveraged existing agreements, maximized those and those relationships, and then we did one minor amendment to create pathways for CDN to work with our data. Okay, I'm going to turn it over, I think, to Diana to talk about the CDE part.
All right. Okay. Hi, everyone. Okay, so as Christine walked through, and hopefully you're getting a sense of the, the landscape that we were working in, the existing relationships, trying to leverage and use those the existing pieces of it. So the new pieces would be the CDE needed a data use agreement to link those records to social services, to the healthcare services, as well as developmental services. And then the other piece, to analyze that data specifically for AB 2083 analysis. And then on the Health and Human Services side, there was the business use case proposal, so that BUCP. Again, to dig into the data, it's not just enough to link it and have it sit there, but then to dig into the data and bring the questions that the AB 2083 group, the team were bringing. Okay, next slide. Okay, so in these next few slides, and this is usually what our Children Data Network partners walk us through, what Christine took the lead and I'm taking over in these last few slides, so know that you're going to get a very high-level overview of this stuff. But wanted to give you a sense of what it looked like for all of us in this data sharing and data linkage that CDN facilitated. All right, thank you. Okay, so it first began with what CDN has been doing with that record reconciliation agreement. They're collecting, once all the agreements were in place, collecting bringing in those records, the Health and Human Services records. And a key piece of it was each of our state agencies I can say from the CDE perspective, we had our linkage record, and so we sent over that personally identifiable information that allowed them to do that linkage piece. But then we also sent what all of us sent over, analytic files, and that was for that for the year, that 2021 school year that we were looking at. And we had, all of us in our different agencies had determined, here are the variables, the data elements that we're interested in linking over. Well, we're interested in looking at, but also being able to link to the spine, or the youth that we're going to link to the spine, which was the child welfare, those sets of elements. So Health and Human Services sent over their stuff. Next slide. And then, one more slide. And then it was our turn over at CDE. And like I said, we sent over our initial demographic file. They linked that data. They then disposed of it, destroyed it, because it does contain personally identifiable information. And then we sent over our analytic file. All right, next slide. And from there, everything was in CDN's database. And so once all those records were securely transferred, CDN cleaned all of our data. As you can imagine, the admin data does get messy. They do the probabilistic linkage, and I think that's really important to keep in mind. These are probabilistically linked, and so they're using the demographic information to say within a certain degree of confidence that we have linked these records. We think that this education record, this healthcare record, this social service record represents is one youth. So once that was sent over, CDN then dug, and this was, the amazing piece of it is they really conducted that rigorous analysis. They were able to do the analysis across, informed by the questions that we were bringing, and really the overarching descriptive landscape baseline data that we were trying to generate. They were able to dig in, create massive amounts of tables for us, then bring those tables to all of our agencies to vet the results that they had produced. And so from there, we then, then CDN passed over, again, those massive amounts of results and tables, and, they had detailed their methods. That's all in the appendix. And then it was the AB 2083's team turn to work through the introduction, the conclusion, and then to develop implications for the analysis. And so I want to pause here really quick because I've gone through this really quickly. This took months. I'm guessing years to finally pull it together. But I can't underscore the role that each of these agencies played, and then what's been echoed and brought up through this convening over the course of these 3 days is it really key enabling conditions being relationship and trust, and that there was a cohesiveness around again leveraging existing agreements, working into spaces, leaning into unknown spaces. We had never done this before. And so having Children's Data Network certainly helped facilitate this and helped us lean into this space. It really helped model for all of us a researcher agency partnership. And so we had this orientation toward research and evaluation, which has allowed this group to create this baseline data, which is really important, that technical assistance to do the linkage, to produce those tables, and to do it on the timeline that Children's Data Network had over the span of, 5-6 weeks. They pulled all, once that data was there, they, just got to work and vetted all that stuff with us. Being able to create this, bring that technical expertise has allowed this group to then bring more complex, to tackle more complex policy questions. And you'll hear more of that very soon. Okay. All right, I'll pass it over to Dina.
Good morning, everyone. Dina Kokkos-Gonzales with the Department of Healthcare Services. Really happy to be here to talk about, you've heard a lot of the work that was done to get to the place to have the data to be able to create the report, and it was a lot. And underscoring everything that was said as far as the amount of work, the relationship, the common goals, the commitment, and again, working collaboratively as a team and through our teams within our own departments to get here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the way that the report is laid out. And so again, this is a little bit of an overview, and when you see the report, you'll see the way that it is structured. It starts with an executive summary, and the executive summary speaks to AB 2083 mandate for children and youth systems of care, what it is, what the mandate is about. It also speaks to AB 153, which came after AB 2083, and which this report was mandated as part of AB 153. So there were a couple of reports that were mandated prior through AB 2083, and this report that's mandated through AB 153. And then the report provides an overview, which I think does a really good job describing what the reporting requirements are, what they are, the mandate they're tied to. It talks about the reporting framework and really describes how each of the reports connect and build on one another. It also talks about the phases of our reporting, and I think it does a really good job speaking to the phases and then tying those phases to the reports that it is addressed in. So, for example, the first phase is mapping current continuum and identifying state and local data. The second phase was local capacity gap determinations related to placement settings and service networks. And then the third phase is planning to address identified capacity gaps using systems of care approach. And again, these three phases were described in the first initial report to the legislature. It broke down these phases, and so here we are, filling in and filling the gaps to those phases by these reports. The report then goes into the supplementary analysis to the multi-year plan for increasing capacity, which we're calling the landscape analysis. And then there's conclusion and recommendations, which really are about informing the implementation of our prior recommendations and investments. So again, tying back to the prior report and really looking at how to implement. And then it includes key connections and key findings and recommendations. And you're going to hear a little bit more about those key findings and key recommendations. There are 4 key connections. Oh, can we go one more?
Do I go back?
No, forward. There are 4 key connections highlighting how this data plays an informational role supporting the previous report, the multi-year plan and identified capacity gaps recommendations. And then the data contained in this report cannot be identified as causal or correlative. However, these key connections indicate initial connections to the prior report's key findings, capacity gaps, and recommendations. So the main 4 key connections include trauma responsive continuum, preventative and coordinated continuum, unique and complex unmet needs, and local and state barriers. I'm going to turn it over to Sara now.
So again, we're making a connection between this prior report. We were mandated to create a report about what we saw the gaps in our system as being, and then to develop a plan for how to fill those gaps. At the time, we did not have this matched data, but we do have a fairly lengthy report that made these connections previously. So now we're going over how those connections are supported or influenced by the data that we now have matched. One of our prior connections in terms of the gap across the system of care was the need for this trauma responsive continuum. And the prior report really centered on the lack of coordinated models for understanding trauma, how we train around trauma, how we prepare our workforce, but also our caregivers to respond to children across their social environment with respect to those traumatic experiences and needs. And make some very specific recommendations about service types of gaps as well, such as respite, and a lot of other findings within that prior report. With this report, we're finding, this is an example of some of the data connections we're seeing, where we see 50% of youth in foster care had a most recent placement with a non-relative substitute caregiver. And just the, residing with someone who is a substitute caregiver from a child development lens, it's really, really significant for us to name that and to have a quantifiable kind of basis for it. It's one thing that we say it generally a lot, but now having this quantifiable data, I think, is really, really, really important in terms of how we respond to it across the entire system of care. 42.3% of children in foster care experience 2 or more moves in their current episode. As parents, I think anyone who's a parent can just, empathize and try to put ourselves in the experience of a child who has experienced such a move. And what does this mean for education? What does this mean for regional center? What does this mean for mental health? And really digging into that data, I think, helps us make it more real and make it something that we can wrap our heads around what we can do to support those youth in a different way. We found 1,200 youth were identified as being impacted by commercial sexual exploitation. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. These are things we know conceptually. We know that it's big in our system, but having the quantifiable data is essential. A quarter of foster youth on Medi-Cal who receive an ACEs screening had 4 or more ACEs. There's a ton of child development literature about the significance of that. But again, needing, quantifying that for our system, we can do that county level. We can really make that actionable, I think, by having the quantifiable data. Another key connection that we made in the prior report was about preventative and a coordinated continuum and the need for that. And so our prior report goes into some of the literature around the need for that. But again, now what we're adding is a depth of the data to support it and to help point us into what we do about it. And one of some of the findings are nearly all foster youth have multi-system involvement. It's not really a surprise. But again, quantifying that and knowing really what those numbers look like is important. Foster youth experienced multiple moves during an episode, and nearly half of foster youth on Medi-Cal have received a diagnosis of attachment disorder. These are just some of the kind of tidbit points that we're making connections in our report. And again, want to emphasize that the next step of this is for the field and everyone, that we work with to use this data and to start to unpack it in a countless, and we're creating possibilities with this data match. We're not trying to have this report tell what the findings are at all. And then, oh, okay. And then lastly is made a connection about unique and complex unmet needs. And so there's a lot of recommendations in our prior report about those complex needs, and made recommendations about what the ILTs, interagency leadership teams can do to support. And just here also some data points that were found. 1,500 youth in care experience an unplanned discharge from an STRTP. How many youth are receiving especially mental health services, and how many youth in our system are infants and toddlers who are also receiving early start services. So these are just, again, examples of data points that are, we think, really significant.
Okay, so we're just gonna go quickly over a couple tables, and these again are just like excerpts from the overall. There's so much data in this landscape analysis. It's really pretty exciting. But as you'll see across, right, at the top in the columns, that's the first column is the spine, right? That's child welfare's data that we linked to. But now we can see when we look at like this table, we have those youth that were impacted by commercial sexual exploitation in the child welfare system. But then we were able to say how many of those kids also receive developmental services. And of those, how many of them are on Medi-Cal? And of those, how many are enrolled in public school? So that's kind of how the tables are laid out. And again, it's kind of the first ever opportunity that we've been able to see child welfare data points across multiple systems. Next slide. The same here, we were able to kind of roll up some different variables to look at unplanned discharges from STRTPs. This is lifetime. So again, another big piece of this work was our data dictionary, how we define things across our systems, the timing of things. And so there's a robust data dictionary in addition, but you'll see the numbers there. Next slide. This was only from the Medi-Cal or Department of Healthcare Services data that was linked to social services data. So again, when we look at those with acute behavioral needs, that's the number of youth that utilized inpatient, especially mental health services in the observation window. Next slide. And then we were able to link developmental services data, which we've really not been able to take this look at it either before. And so you can see really a pretty significant amount of our children and youth in foster care that are served by the regional center are in the 0 to 3 age range. So again, really just like really powerful information to have. Next slide. And Diana.
Okay, I am going to walk us through our last key connection and then move us through some findings. Okay, so with this report, we do accomplish, I hope it is clear that we definitely accomplished the prior recommendation to model a state data sharing governance and reporting framework. I think there was a lot of learning done at the state level and documented through this report and through this process. And we've created opportunities to develop a shared multi-system outcome metrics. However, I think it was clear once we saw these tables, it really highlighted the data discrepancies across programs and underscoring these prior recommendations coming from the multi-year plan to align definitions of youth and foster care across programs. So for example, according to our records at CDE, nearly 1/3 of the public school students in foster care had an IEP, which was a substantially higher proportion than the 8.1% that were identified per CWS CMS records. I mean, that is a big discrepancy in those two systems. So in our education records of this analytic cohort, 31% of the kids have IEPs. If you're just looking at the child welfare records, only 8% of them are identified as having IEPs. So there is some discrepancy going on over there. Similarly, we had discrepancies around primary language, and so English was coded as a primary language for about 90% of the youth in the child welfare records, but for the records in education, it was only about, I think it was 77.4%. So again, a discrepancy. It's in the information, same youth that we're talking about, but we have different information to within the records. And then another discrepancy, child disability was coded for about 33.9% of the foster care developmental services population. However, that youth by definition have a developmental delay. And so again, there's another discrepancy. All right, we have to go quick, huh? Okay, so here are our findings that we're going to walk through very quickly. And I hope they're going to signal a need for us to continue using this matched data, so this data set, to tackle and take on bigger policy questions. All right, next slide. Okay, so based on the report findings, we have this need to conduct an additional cross-system analysis to inform program enhancements and current investments. So we've got this linked data, and all of the state agencies, including CDE, we have signed on to continue using it throughout the year, continue using the existing data set over this, so all the the defined population, to take what we've learned, the evidence we've created through this landscape analysis, and bring more complex questions. And so, yeah, next slide. Okay, and the second finding connects to the data discrepancies that I was highlighting in that key connection. It really means there is some work to be done in aligning the definitions of youth and foster care across systems for reporting and data linkage, and aligning those definitions, but also really understanding where we overlap, where we don't overlap, and where the misalignment is causing data discrepancies in each of our systems. Okay. Oh, and I will add one other thing. So utilizing, again, what we've learned in this landscape analysis to move us toward creating a definition of children and youth with unmet complex needs. So how do we operationalize that to then bring to a more sophisticated analysis? Okay, and finally, or at least for my set of slides, having these cross-system definitions would move us toward our next finding from the analysis, which is to increase the fidelity and utilization of cross-system program data. And so, again, using the descriptive statistics and the data from this analysis to inform future and current investments across programs. And as we've discussed, the data and the results really underscore the need to validate our department data linkage and look at those algorithms and see where we can troubleshoot and identify issues, and how can we again align better. I think there's also work to be done in evaluating case management systems for required reporting and data fields. Now that we know what data elements that we're really interested in, understanding the multi-system involvement of youth, being able to create best practices around data entry and documenting these different fields. There's also supporting data literacy at the local level and through technical assistance. So that's just a few of those pieces.
Okay, and the last key finding as we wrap up is, as Dina had mentioned, we've had 2 prior reports to this one that we were mandated to do, and in that first one, we proposed a 3-phased approach to better understanding the needs of our youth. And so the final finding is for us to utilize this information to help us complete phase 2 and phase 3. So how are we taking this information and sharing it back with the locals? How are we utilizing this as an approach to inform local capacity building and really responsive services and supports to our children, youth, and families? And so I think with that, I don't know, we're probably out of time. I think we'd want to just leave everybody probably with a call to action. Without a shared vision, without everybody showing up, from our program people to our legal people to our leaders to our data experts to our IT that transferred the files, right? Without everybody showing up and saying, yes, I'm not going to accept a no, and the trust in the relationships is critical. And data feels scary, and these processes seem overwhelming, but eat the elephant one bite at a time and just show up and say yes. So I think we would just leave with that. Our partnerships are important to us, and just really want to share gratitude for all the work that you all are doing at the local level. We appreciate you.